Subash, I know the Vedantic traditions and philosophy believe that consciousness is the ultimate reality. What can we learn from the yoga experience where they claim to be in touch on a pretty regular basis with this ultimate reality? What's the substance of the yoga experience?
The starting point in the yogic experience is the idea that just as you have the outer cosmos, you also have the inner cosmos, the outer sky and the inner sky. And these two have a correspondence. Now, this is not as far-fetched as one might think, because we do know that our cognitive capacities are distributed, and it's the whole spectrum of cognitive capacities inside our brain which makes it possible for us to integrate all the information that we obtain and form our conception of what our outer reality is. Now, the yogic tradition makes a beginning from this point of view, and the whole objective is how do we create our inner sky to have a correspondence with the unfolding of reality by itself. So in actuality, the yogic system speaks of three skies. One is the outer physical sky. The second is the inner sky of our memories, which we are constructing and which becomes a guide for us to explore the reality sky within us, which is not so clearly illuminated. So that what yoga does through intense practices of one kind or the other, and one can approach it through either introspection, or one can also have yoga of dance, if you will, of whatever activity one does, if one analyzes it to the extent one can, and one reaches a point where one sees that there is a paradox in the framework which one had assumed to have been the reality prior to that point. That is what helps us go beyond the understanding that we possessed until then onto a new one. It's somewhat of a kind of a ladder, and it's like a ladder in a brush on ground, and you have to climb above the brush before you would have the entire sky, and where you could, poetically speaking, take off and fly, and then you'll be one with the true contents of your consciousness.
So let's look at both aspects of this. One, how they achieve that, and then what is it that they achieve and they feel. So most people think of yoga as positions and positions of the body. There's also a meditative aspect. So help me understand how that helps you explore the inner universe.
Yoga, as described by Patanjali in his famous tract about 22 or 2300 years ago, speaks of 8 different steps. And it starts with self-discipline, it starts with mindfulness approach to the body, which is where the asanas come in.
But those are the positions.
Those are the positions. It also involves self-study and so on. And then you have to hold an idea, a conception in your mind. And as you meditate on that, eventually you are able to transcend and divide or dissolve the separation that exists between the observer and the observed. And it's when you have transcended that separation that you are one with the unfoldment of reality by itself. And in fact, there is something very interesting in one of the Vedic texts about that, which says that one who knows not, and one who knows not knows. And what this is really trying to communicate is that so long as you think you're separated from the reality, and that is what your knowledge is, you actually do not possess the true knowledge. It's only when you have completely dissolved yourself that is when you would have that extraordinary intuition.
What gives you the confidence that this is not self-deception, a kind of a hallucination, a self-hypnosis into a semi-psychotic state? Pardon me for being a skeptic.
No, absolutely. What gives us confidence? Well, the confidence is is the self-knowledge that one possesses after one has traveled through this journey. Because one can also be on drugs and say that, okay, I know it all, right? But this journey is transformative. If you are not through going through a process of really learning yourself and learning the reality around you, you would not be transformed. I guess you would have, in many different ways, regressed. You would feel yourself apart, and this also gives you the capacity to also see through what's going on around you. And in one of those flashes where you are truly dissolved yourself and felt as a part of the entire cosmos, which some anthropologists have called the oceanic feeling. At that moment, you seem to have bliss, you seem to have no doubt. So, in that sense, it is empirically verified to yourself. Now, you cannot communicate it, and you cannot communicate it just because, or as if one were to use the Vedic argument, that this knowledge is the higher knowledge of the experiencing self about itself, and it cannot be expressed in terms of things and relationship between things.
Yeah. If I give you all of that, if I say now I'm going to go along with it, I'm going to agree with it, what follows? So I want to go to that final step. What follows? Because what can follow is almost a psychosomatic self-improvement. So all the feelings that you talk about are legitimate and they're real and you give the self-confidence, but there's no sense of reality. I mean, you may think there's a reality, but that just helps your psychosomatic hormones feel good and you're in touch with yourself and all of that. What gives you the second level of confidence that that feeling that you have really is a consciousness ultimate reality? How do you make that leap over that gap?
Well, what follows? There are two ways of looking at what are the implications of the yogic view. One implication is that it's a very optimistic view of the world. So we can look at it from a pragmatic perspective. If you really hold the Vedic view, then the world is a magnificent place to discover. And then claims such as some scientists make that the whole laws of nature are known and there is really not very much to know, and that can be a depressing thought, that what is there to live life for? There is no excitement because we have already discovered the continents and the physical universe, so there's not very much to do. So that is one. The other is something much more extraordinary. There are claims by yogis or by creative people, not necessarily formal yogis in all cultures all over the world, who came by extraordinary knowledge, sometimes a knowledge in terms of intuitions. But there are also examples in literature about totally improbable things which one cannot explain on terms of random events that occurred or a random thought that came. And perhaps the only way for a skeptic to make sense of it would be to say that indeed consciousness is non-physical, it pervades the entire world, and if one were to be in touch with one's own consciousness, then all the wonderful things would be available to one.